Welcome to Transnational Competition Law course, and dear learner and viewer. In the last lecture, we have discussed the nature of remedies, competition remedies provided under the economic competition law and the law relating to the fuel efficiency and competitiveness, and law relating to the concentration, and law relating to food in the Israel, and we have seen how Section 2A and Section 2B of the Economic Competition Act vis-a-vis Section 14 and 15 of the Economic Competition Act try to create a kind of an administrative mechanism for the advancement of the competition remedies. We have referred to some of the cases which are delivered by the Israeli Competition Authority and the Competition Tribunal to look at as to what remains the exact content of the competition remedies. What we deciphered in the previous lecture, that the scope and ambit of the remedies in Israel starts with financial penalties, enforcement actions, measures against the monopolies, address of abusive pricing, and anti-competitive behavior to ensure, to maintain, to sustain the competition in the market. And in the right earnest, the Israel Competition Authority engages in consultation, which are generally to be sought on privatization of decision, and it is considered expedient and necessary to promote industry competitiveness and the market flexibility and openness. On the side of recommendation, the Israeli competition remedies try to see that the regulatory reform, fair competition, and market opening initiatives should always be a kind of a perpetual exercise. And we have seen that the entire scope and ambit of the remedies in Israel happens to be conferring some kind of an exemptions that is granted for specific cases of restrictive arrangement subject to control and approval if the state and the competition authority and tribunal believes that those restrictive arrangements are nothing but happens to be in the national interest, and the expediencies of the state demands that such kind of the restrictive arrangement must be entered into for the larger social good. So, right from the financial penalties to enforcement action against the monopolies, consultation, recommendation, and granting exemptions, it has some other kind of the policy prescriptions under the competition remedies, and that relates to the investigations which are to be conducted across the boundaries of the Israel in matters of anti-competitive behavior. And in that respect, the guidelines and policies addresses primarily to all kind of the competition concerns in relation to the investigations. And then what we find that the investigation guidelines and policies on the competition remedies tries to give a kind of a flip and the void which is being created to look at the entire conspectus of the competition remedy seems to have been fulfilled by the guidelines and policies of the competition authorities issued time to time for promotion of fair market, for promotion of the competition, to address some of the competition concerns which have been practically realized in matters of enforcement and execution of competition law. And the overarching purpose of the guideline and policy happens to ensure compliance of the competition law and the advancement of the competition remedies. Now, dear learner, having understood the nature, scope, and ambit of the competition remedies in Israel, we will try to see that how the case law development on that point, as we have already taken a large number of cases from the Israeli jurisdiction. Here, for our purposes, we will confine to two cases, and the two cases happens to which has been handed down by the Israeli competition authorities to reflect upon the nature and the scope of the uh, competition remedies. The Israeli Competition Authority intended to impose generally the financial penalties, and it has imposed a very exorbitant penalty on the Facebook and its US parent company, uh, Facebook Incorporation, on the ground that the Facebook company have failed to report the acquisition of two Israeli companies, Redkicks and Service Friend, which has been required by the competition law. So the Israeli Competition Authority in this case have very clearly investigated that in matters of US parent companies Facebook Incorporation case, there happens to be two Israeli companies, Redkicks and Service Frame, which happens to be hand in glove in creating some kind of the anti-competitive practices, and then the requirement of the competition law was applied and resulted into the imposition of the penalties. The case deserves our attention because this case of the Facebook in the Israel under the Israeli Competition Authority's judgment happens to found that the Facebook virtually acquired two Israeli companies, Redkicks and Service Friend, in 2018 and 19 without reporting the transaction to Israeli Competition Authority. This is the one allegation which has been which has been investigated. The other kind of the investigation revealed that these two Israeli companies, Redkicks and Service Friend, happens to be hand in glove with the Facebook American company in regard to that without seeking and obtaining Director General's approval before before executing the acquisition as mandated by the competition law, they have charted a different route, and thus the Israeli Competition Authority found that without having any kind of the prior approval from the Director General of Israeli Competition Authority, they executed the acquisition, and it happens to be a naked violation of the Israeli competition law. Thereby, the Israeli Competition Authority have justified and legitimized its position and stand that the inquiry which has been conducted and the investigation which has been conducted ultimately led to the opinion and to the finding that the Facebook, which also owns Instagram, allegedly holds a monopoly in social media market for private users in Israel. And this observation and this investigation and this finding by the Israel's competition authority resulted that on a closer scrutiny, what they find that not only these two companies, which happens to be the Redkicks and Service Friend, the Israeli companies, but on deeper examinations and investigation, it was found that Facebook, incorporation of the US origin, which has also owning an Instagram, uh, then they have allegedly holds a monopoly in the social media market for all private users in Israel, and then the requirement for reporting the transaction under the monopoly threshold was done, and then in this case that the Israeli Competition Authority has come out with a kind of a imposition of the financial penalties to a very hefty financial penalties to have a salutary impact that no other company can indulge into any kind of the acquisition without seeking the approval of the Israeli Competition Authority and exercising monopoly on the Israeli market, be that the digital industry or a non-digital industry. The other case in point, which happens to be of a far-reaching significance, is the case of Haifa Port Limited case, wherein the Israeli Competition Authority sought consultation regarding consideration of economy-wide concentration in relation to proposed decision of the Haifa Port Limited case for the privatize the state's holding in the Haifa Port Limited. So the main issue in this case was the twofold. The one was the economy-wide concentration, number one, and number two, there was a privatized state holding in the Haifa Port Limited. Thus, on these two counts, that the Israeli Competition Authority have constituted a committee, and the committee have examined and investigated the entire issue of economy-wide concentration as well as privatize the state holding, privatize state's holding in Haifa Port Limited. Then the committee found that and finally recommended that certain entities to participate in the tender for the sale of Israel Postal Company's share and in tenders for the acquisition of the state holding in the port of Haifa, a photovoltaic solar facility in Dimona, and the purchase of Haggett Power transactions. There happens to be some kind of the violation of the competition law, and then this case happens to be of having a larger import not only on the privatized state holding but on economy-wide concentration and the involvement of Israel Postal Company's shares as well as the acquisition of a state holding in the port of Haifa or in a subsidiary company of photovoltaic solar facility in Dimona for the purchase of the Haggett Power Station. Taken as a whole, the transactions which have undertaken by the Haifa Port Limited case is the another salutary judgment which has been handed down by the Israeli Competition Authority. Taking these two cases alongside the cases which we discussed earlier happens to be of MBI Pharma for excessive pricing, Gafniel versus Central Bottle Company Limited, the Tunova versus Nor and Nor versus Tunova, and vice versa, and then RLFI Agriculture Limited versus Man Truck and Bus and others, and Zalika versus Tuna. What we see that the entire nature, concept, scope, and ambit of the competition remedy under the Israeli law of economic competition law 1988 and the fuel efficiency competition law of 1994 and the concentration law of 2013 and the food law of 2014 along with the provisions of section 2A and 2B and then the provisions of section 14 and 15 of the Economic Concentration Act cumulatively happens to design and redesign the entire scope and ambit of the competition remedies in Israel. Now, we would like to see that what are the broad implication of this kind of the nature of remedies which are coming out of by the Supreme Court of the Israel or the Israeli Competition Authority or the Israeli Competition Tribunal or the District Court of Jerusalem in relation to the violation of competition law. Now we can see that what cumulatively it tries to have an impact and implication for transnational competition law, then what we find that the extraterritorial application of competition remedies in Israel has a wider implication for transnational competition law precisely because the range of the remedy, the kinds of the remedy, and which include not only the prosecutorial strategy, but it include financial imposition of the fine, but it also include some kind of the privatization of the decision and some kind of a leverage and a space in the public interest to decide the cases of the violation of competition law, then when you see in a larger platter the entire range of the competition remedies which are emanating from the competition law in Israel, what we find that it has addressed enforcement issues in a very dexterous manner and in a very precise manner in the context of anti-competitive practices that span into not only the boundaries and the territory of the Israel, but it transcends the boundaries and territories of Israel, and it involves a multiple jurisdiction at regional and as well as the global level. And then we see that it is to be augured and forwarded not through the slew of reform of the law, not by alone the salutary impact of the Israel Competition Authority's judgment and the competition tribunal's verdict, but it also try to encompass the cooperation between the competition authorities of different countries, and which requires a certain degree of collaborative efforts and some meaningful collaborations which governs the cross-border merger, which governs the cross-border acquisition, which governs the cross-border restrictive practices, and then how the Israeli law have have been endowed with great potentiality to look and to solve these disputes in a very amicable manner. And then we find that the entire process of extraterritorial application of competition law in Israel eventually leads to a process what is called as the harmonization, and which primarily try to focus and primarily try to align with the competition laws and policy across all the nations of the world to promote fair competition in a global context. And then on the side of the jurisdiction or in the matters of the jurisdiction, when it is called upon for the determination of the competition authority, it is very significant to note that all its investigation which has been carried out by the Israeli Competition Authority and Israeli Competition Tribunal happens to see that the investigation and the enforcement of the law in the transnational cases should at least serve the basic purpose and the canons of the competition law and the jurisprudence that has been well taken care of in the Israeli jurisdictions. Thus, what we find that the challenges which we pursue or we face and we try to gauge out of the extraterritorial application of the competition law in Israel happens to that include different kind of a different sets of the legal framework. We find a conflicting kind of a regulation. We also find some kind of a conflicting coordinations among the multiple authorities, and how these challenges of the varying degree of the legal framework and the conflicting kind of a regulations, be that the conflict of international law, be that the conflict of laws, or be that of the inherent conflicting regulation of a particular country in itself, and then the issue of the coordination with the multiple competition authorities happens to be some great challenges to be discussed, but it can be very confidently to be said that all kind of the international agreement and all kinds of the facilitation of the cooperation, all kinds of the information sharing has been well settled within the precinct and the purview and the pale of the Israeli competition law and authority with a great degree of success, and have served a very guiding force and serves a kind of a model that can be immaculated to be replicated in other competition jurisdiction for the advancement of extraterritorial application of the competition remedies. With this, dear learner, I conclude, and I think that our lectures dealing with the extraterritorial application of competition remedies in the context of Israel will be of great help to understand the rubrics and as well as the trajectories of the transnational competition law. Thank you very much. Happy browsing and learning.